It's 4 p.m. Stand up. It's count time. It's time for every man and woman to stand up and be counted. I'm Brother L.D. Azobra, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Count Time Podcast. We got some special shows here this month. We got a lot to share, and we want you to be a part of it, and we don't want you to miss any of these shows. So please, take your time and scroll down right now and hit the subscribe button. That way you can catch each show each week throughout this month and the months to come. Also, please like and share Count Time to all your friends and loved ones. Thank you once again, and we were looking forward to you joining in each week into Count Time.
Hello, I am Dr. Joyce Marie Jackson, Chair of the Department of Geography and Anthropology at Louisiana State University. So we would really like to thank Count Time and LD Azobra, as well as Cultural Crossroads, for giving us this opportunity to just feature some of our speakers so that others can hear them that did not attend the conference. As we enter Women's History Month, we are sort of rolling off the back of Black History Month, and there were many wonderful programs that took place all around the country, which is something that, we really celebrate 365 days of the year, but we just kind of focus more on it during the month of February. Well, during the month of February, we also had this conference called Navigating the Storms of Slavery, Reflect, Restore, and Reclaim. And this conference was held at the LSU Alumni Center at Louisiana State University. And it was co-sponsored by the Department of Geography and Anthropology, which I am the chair of the department and also the coordinator of the conference. And our co-host was the Southern University Law Center, where John Pierre is the chancellor. During the conference, there were a number of very impactful keynote speakers and panelists. And since this is Women's History Month, we would like to feature a few of those speakers on the program. We're starting with Dr. Ruth Simmons. Dr. Ruth Simmons is a remarkable individual whose journey from being a sharecropper's daughter from Texas to becoming the president of 3 prestigious universities. This week, we are featuring Monique Verdin. Monique is, she gave us really a very insightful talk on her community, which is the Houma Nation. And she's talked about the environment, how they're losing their homes because of erosion, coastal erosion. She also talked about health issues as well as the educational system and its impact on the Houma community. And so she's also produced a film called Louisiana, My Love. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy Monique Verdin.
Indigenous slavery in shaping the power of colonial oppression, as well as constructs of race, and what would then become the dominant form of slavery with African enslaved peoples. And so these histories are intertwined in incredibly complex ways. And as Dr. Eisenhower points out, the decimation of indigenous peoples was vast and horrendous. But I think he also points to the fact that there was endurance, reinvention, resilience, and continuity. These indigenous peoples, especially in the southern coastal areas of Louisiana, sought out the bayous where they could re-establish their communities, live outside of the parameters of colonial society, and thrive. And those legacies continue today. And I am thrilled to present our next speaker, Monique Verdin. This is her second visit to the LSU campus this year. She was here in November and participated in the College of Human Sciences and Education Day of Dialogue, which was designed to hear the voices of Indigenous peoples, especially in relation to contemporary issues of coastal loss of land, loss of their traditional lands, and the impact that that has had on their communities, especially in regard to education. And Dean Mitchell, who's here with us today, who is the Dean of the College of Human Sciences and Education, sponsored the Day of Dialogue with a vision of creating relationships in which Indigenous communities and LSU can partner to work together to have a better understanding of the issues that are impacting the Native American communities here, especially in regard to education. And one of the main goals of this partnership is to establish a Native American Studies program. It is with shame that I say that LSU does not have a Native American Studies department or even minor. And that's one of the visions and goals that we hope is going to come out of this partnership, working together and with the Dean and others at LSU. So that's a long-winded way of introducing Monique, and let me just give a little bit more detail about her. She's a transdisciplinary artist and storyteller who documents the complex relationship between environment, culture, and climate in Southeast Louisiana. She's a citizen of the Houma Nation and director of the Land Memory Bank and Seed Exchange, and a member of the Another Gulf is Possible collaborative, working to envision just economies, vibrant communities, and sustainable ecologies. She also supports the Oklahina Ikish Hola, did I get that? Yeah, okay. People of the Sacred Medicine Trail, which is a network of Indigenous gardeners, as the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network's Gulf South Food and Medicine Sovereignty Program Manager. Monique is also co-producer of the documentary My Louisiana Love, and her work has been included in a variety of environmentally inspired projects, including Cry You One, a multi-platform performance, and An Unfathomable City, the New Orleans Atlas, and a collaborative book, Return to Yakni Chito, Houma Migrations. So it is with pleasure that I welcome Monique back, and thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you to all the organizers and everyone behind the scenes to make this possible. It's a very important conversation, and yeah, just sitting with what we've just listened to this morning and thinking about disruptions and migrations and stories of survival and adaptation. And I was invited to share kind of a contemporary perspective. So most of my adult life, I've been using whatever tools or my voice to really make sense of how we got here, to make sense of the stories that my grandmother told me at her kitchen table and what that meant and how it fits into this bigger planetary situation that we're all facing. And so I have a lot of slides, and I might go a little fast through some of them, but I wanted to start with a teacher of mine, a dear friend, a relative, Anise Verdin, who is pictured here. And this was, Nacy is his nickname, a shrimper, a crabber, a carpenter, a man of many gifts, a joker, and was my primary guide has passed after Ida, but still a strong spirit in my life and in my understanding of the Yaknishido, of the bayous of South Louisiana's magical power point that we call the Mississippi River Delta. And he had never been on a plane before the BP drilling disaster in 2010, and at that time was suffering with esophageal cancer, and put up a good fight for a very long time. But he was like, hey, Monique, they want us to go to Washington, D.C. to go talk to some people. And so, it's this very surreal moment of being like, okay, yeah, let's go. And us wandering around the halls of Congress with these jars of oil that they had scooped up from, Grand Isle and the organizers. We were with an organization called Gulf Voices at the time. And I just thought, well, is this work? Like, I don't know what, and there was really well-dressed interns eating ice cream. I was like, what is going on? It was like National Ice Cream Day, and here we are with our jars of oil being like, we can't fish right now. Our lives are like not in my backyard, hello, it's like in the nation's backyard. So some of the images that you'll see, I've been layering photographs of time and place to tell layered stories. And so this is, the image in the background is in Ponoshan, Point of the Oaks or Point of the Dog. It depends on who you ask. And I'm very sorry that Christine Verdin, my Indigenous sister from Ponoshan, is not here today to share about the amazing work they're doing to get a school up and running at the ends of the bayou, where they're closing schools, they're closing grocery stores, they're closing, they're closing churches, and to witness this over, the last, all of my life, but really to be putting a frame around it since I was, a young woman in the late 1990s, 1998, I started doing some of this work. So just to orient ourselves and also to want to recognize all of the ancestors that have made it possible for us to be here and the ancestors who have called this place home. Sometimes I'll introduce myself and I'll say, I live in Cancer Alley just north of the dead zone, which is, true. But I also people are like, what's going on in South Louisiana? There's indigenous people there. It's like, yes, it's a major delta on the planet. Like, yes, there were indigenous people here and still are indigenous people who are here. And my relatives found their way down Bayou Lafourche between the Atchafalaya and the Mississippi, which are, of course, the same river. This was a place that my ancestors were pushed to or migrated from, coming from the Shatter Zone, coming from the times of the 1700s when folks were trying to find safe refuge. And, the Houma in this Jesuit journals in 1699, they say that they're, north of the Baton Rouge, north of the Houma, which is actually today where Angola is. And so to think about how, where there were once villages and communities, now they're, were replaced with plantations, and those plantation sites now are the sites of petrochemical plants and prisons and universities, like where we are right now. And so I think it's really important to recognize that. We can talk about slavery of the past, but to recognize how multinational corporations have been dictating and dominating and making decisions, and those decisions that are playing out in modern times, in that communities are living next to toxic sites that are hazardous sites that could, with any disaster, where, even we don't need a disaster, they could have their own disaster, and how vulnerable that kind of plantation mentality has paved the way for this kind of corporate interest and that wealth is going to Swiss banks or being held in very far places. Boluncha, I learned this word in 2017 when the city was celebrating its 300-year founding, and I thought, oh wow, I was really angry. I was like, why didn't somebody tell me that the place that I love and I know is the place of many tongues, or place of babbling tongues, place of many languages in Choctaw, which is still to this day living up to its name. And Boluncha, in my opinion, is much cooler than New Orleans. And as we were celebrating New Orleans 300, I kept thinking, like, we should be celebrating Boluncha 3000. Like, let's expand our history to tell more of the truth, right? So my two great-grandmothers stand in the front line, and I share this image a lot just to remember that in the late 1920s, this is how my relatives were living in the Yaquishido, where my grandmother picked pecans. My cousins are now putting crab traps out in those same sites. And so you see the palmetto roof and the mud and moss chimney. And this is also at the time when oil and gas was coming in, and my ancestors were, they didn't speak English, and they definitely were not literate, and they were signing X's onto pieces of papers that they thought were leasing land, or their lands were just stolen from them through taxes and other kinds of bastards don't inherit kind of laws, loopholes. So just want to give a shout out to the crawfish as the ultimate creator of the lands that we stand upon, and really fascinating. The Houma share a creation story with other southeastern tribes that give credit to the crawfish. And I think that living here in the Delta, being in between salt and fresh, and the crawfish living between the land and the water, and every that their life cycle depends on them becoming vulnerable in order to grow, and that's very symbolic in kind of the work that I've been doing, because it's not easy to tell people all the time that the territories that we call home are losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet, and that this place that is so rich is also so poor, and to recognize the erasure that has happened here. So this is a mound, 1,500 years old, in the Yaquishido down by Petit Caillou. And I've been fascinated with United States Geological Survey maps and how places over time change names or disappear, or how what was land becomes water. So the map that's on the base is from the 1930s, marks this as an Indian mound, and the map that's on top from 2015 simply marks it as a cemetery. So I just think it's interesting how that erasure happens, and there's a really brilliant archaeologist by the name of J.R. Mehta who's been doing a lot of coastal mound work, and I've been learning a lot from him about these sites and this technology, and of course, the big mounds that are here, which are at least 6,000 years old, maybe older, and to think of this place as being a place like Boluncha where people continue to gather, and that this is a place and a site of exchange that is not a past tense but a present. I'm just gonna, are we having a Q&A, or we are having a Q&A? Okay, so you're gonna give me like a, great, all right. Again, just to go back to this layering of time and place, and as a young person, I was not able to go to a book that gave me a download of Houma history. There's been a lot that I've been introduced to since, and I just want to give a huge shout out to T. Mayhart Dardar, our Houma historian and brilliant scholar and philosopher, and also to a new book that just came out by Elizabeth Ellis called The Great Power of Small Nations, which really affirmed a lot of these pieces and parts of thinking about how in these times of the early colonized, disruption, how alliances, how adoptions, how migration really impacted survival. And so I've been mining the public archives through the Creative Commons, through old maps, United States Geological Survey maps, and then layering to tell, as I was trying to say, the more multi-dimensional stories of place. And in this map in the 1930s, they were marking the mound here, and also similarly in the 2000s, it's not noted of a place of significance. You can find these maps through Southern Cultures, which tells kind of a story of going south. But my story has really been about how the oil and gas industry really disrupted my family's migration story, and how the loss of land rights and the discrimination that was happening in the Yaquishudo and still to this day is happening in this part of the world. The environmental story and the cultural story, and recognizing how place gets embedded into your DNA. And then also discovering all of these things that you don't know, like Houma's house. Why is Houma's house called Houma's house? This beautiful plantation, right? Well, they have 500-year-old trees that are planted in this circular way, which used to have a big mound there, but that's not in any of the history that you might get there. It's very little like, oh, the Houmas sold their land. What does that mean? And we are, in these times, still having our land be sold. That Standard Oil's foundations have led to, where we are right now, up against a huge expansion of liquefied natural gas terminals along the coast, in addition to the uncertainty of what carbon capture sequestration, which is being targeted into our territories and going to be injected deep beneath us, what that means. And you often hear like the sacrifice zone. Oh, the Gulf South is the sacrifice zone. And what does that mean? And this image was one of my first photographs actually that I took of my grandmother. I was 19 years old, and she took me to where she grew up in Pointe-aux-Chenes, and was just like blown away at how different it looked. They kept talking about the grasses and the salt water and the trees, and to know that this place, which is where my ancestors retreated to as the American planters were coming in, as the high grounds of good earth were being taken up, this was a place of finding a sense of sovereignty, because the bounty of the wetlands provided food security. And now we have these ghost forests, which are symbolizing what's happening with saltwater intrusion and the estuary that's changing so quickly as sea levels rise and the land continues to sink. And as they say, South Louisiana is death by like 10,000 miles of canals that have been cut through our wetlands. And so life in the red zone and how we remain and reclaim is something I'm trying to lean more into, in that for most of my life I've been like, guys, we need to buy land north of I-10 and go, let's all go together. And I do think we need safe places to retreat to, but also, the older I get, the more I recognize that I have a right to be there, that this is my home. It may become more watery, it may not always be land, but that is where my ancestors are buried and where medicine grows. So this is Vivienne. I feel like I'm always introducing my teachers. Before she passed, this was also in 2017, she made me take her to Pointe Barrée. And I said, I just went there, I don't think you want to go. And she said, no, you're taking me. I'm going home. And so I brought her to Pointe Barrée. Pointe Barrée is where they put one of the first, actually it was the first coastal oil rig in Louisiana. And the community, the indigenous community of Houma peoples who lived there, were essentially forced out early on, and now, as you can see, this kind of pipeline, the Humble Canal, the Humble Oil Company. I think that that's like, Humble's not around like they used to be, but you know, that the nature does not create straight lines, so those kind of marking of the land. Oh. This is a project that that was not supposed to be in there, but we're learning to live with water at part of the project called Invisible Rivers right now. And this is just to show this kind of layering. So Vivian, the land in the 1930s, oil and gas comes in, and this is how that map is marked now. So I'll not get into all the details, but you know, the data is all out there. You know, South Louisiana is pockmarked with oil waste pits, thousands of miles of canals. You know, a fifth of the nation's refining capacity is like right here. And by living here, we all know that the other side of that is that our education system is terrible. Our quality of life is at the bottom of the list with the national surveys. And then you have places like the Ile de Jean Charles, which I think there's a film that's going to be shared. The island of Jean Charles, which is right next to Pointe-à-Pitre, an indigenous community that's had been awarded a federal relocation grant to move 30 miles inland, but when you take people away from the bayou, you are taking them away from their ability to feed themselves and their families. The bayou side is a place of business, it's a place of celebration, it is the epicenter. Mr. Edison Darnor just recently passed, but he was one of the few people who refused to sign over to the state and to move to the new island, I think is what they call it. But what happens when people are moved inland to live between two impaired water bodies on old sugarcane land that's been exhausted after years and years of, you know, that's not the solution to climate adaptation, in my opinion, and it's a controversy that's playing out to this day. Speaking of controversy, the web of pipelines just always blows my mind, and these maps are older. They're from the early 2000s, so just to know what this might look like today and how we've always been like pushing the oil up, and now we're like exporting or going to be receiving in regards to this carbon capture sequestration. So yeah. It's hard to know how to close this. I think that the consequences of land loss did not, you know, like that didn't begin with climate change. That is really rooted to colonialism, and our people have been up against that and always moving to different places to try to find a better life, right? Like all humans are looking for. And then we're having multinational corporations that make decisions on our behalf. So I think that, you know, and just to think about how slavery of past plays out in the present, and how we're all kind of conditioned to think that some things are okay or out of sight, out of mind, right? Like, I don't have a plantation in the olden days, but I'm in England, you know, reaping the wealth of cotton, or how some people have to lose everything in order for others to gain fancy things. And when really what matters is, you know, do we have clean water? Do we have safe places to be? Do we have good soil to grow our foods in? Do we have air to breathe? And these are the struggles of the Houma and all of us living on this planet today. We're all facing the consequences of greed and short-sightedness, and in my opinion, and I think that I'm grateful for the times of disaster when the world flips upside down and the water rushes in, because it really has made me have to reckon with what really matters, and knowing that having community and having people who may be strangers but can stand up for each other in solidarity, that along with food security are the keys to survival. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to transition and look at a brief video that Monique referred to. I think I'm going to need...
Life on the island wasn't easy, but it was delivered. I guess it's the life of a child. That's what you wanted to do. Everybody take care of each other.
What is your favorite memory of the island?
That's a good question. My father, he was a fisherman. I remember walking with him in the marshes, when he would go set his traps and so forth.
I was born and raised on the island, in that middle road, that we travel by P-Road and Bow.
Like we go down the bayou and go crabbing and shrimping and oystering and up here you catch crawfish.
So, and there was big oak trees, real big oak trees. And it was all woods, and not like it is now, all marsh. It didn't have no marsh. Sometimes you go months without leaving the island, except to go to school when we went to school. Ain't nobody had cars, just very few people. Because we had cron trees, we got orange trees, we had grapefruit trees, we had gardens and chickens and cows, and we had everything. So we lived on the land. My dad and my grandpa was carpenters, and they would go fishing too, but when they was building a house or a boat, the people that they was building it for, they would give them fish, shrimp, instead of money, because money didn't mean nothing to them. When they had the depression, they didn't even know it. They had a depression because they didn't have no money. Everybody traded their work.
And on weekends I go on the boat with my dad. Being out on the shrimp boat, that's something I wish my grandkids would have been able to experience.
We had bayous, the bayous. Now, there ain't no bayous. It's all water. So, when we used to trap, we trawl now, or we fish. So, yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, that's what I'm missing. That's what I'm missing more. I don't think I've been shrimping since.
I didn't even take a job.
Oh, no,
Okay. I do want to learn, but I also don't want to mess it up. I'm Professor Dr. Heather Stone. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and I have been doing oral histories with the tribe of the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw for about 6 years now. When I went down the first time to the island and met the chief, and we bonded over bologna sandwiches and a love of peaceful places and collecting stories of people that are important to us. We began a friendship, which was very exciting for me.
We gave you an Indian name, Conhort, and I think because you're so kind and sweet.
And so it became our 6-year journey for me to become an honorary tribal member and feel connected to Elders on Charles. Why did you start collecting oral histories?
So, needed to know where we came from. When we started collecting oral history, the elders spoke French, and we were forced to stop speaking French. Take a ruler if you speak French in school and hit you in the hand. So, and my mom and dad couldn't speak any English. I had to learn English in school. There was a lot of traditional knowledge lost because there were the conversion of French to English. You lost the tradition of cooking, baking bread outside on a Dutch oven. They quit doing that because the people say it was a lower class, but the bread was fantastic. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts that we want to receive from thy mouth, Christ our Lord. Amen.
You know, it's like saying, that's how you play a lot of people you did.
Why do you think the island changed so much?
The one did it was the opium. They came straight all the way to Red. And then they started digging some canals on the side to put some rigs, keep on bringing the water.
Yeah, you can see that here.
Yeah. Yeah. See, they still have, this is a pipeline. This is a pipeline, cool over there, this is what this is. Little, when we was growing up, they didn't have no salt water, it was all fresh water. So we used to swim in the bay and it was all fresh water. As they dug canals to put rigs, salt water started coming in and it started killing all the vegetation. We all started working for them oil companies, oil and gas and push boats, tugboats, which is all connected to oil and gas. You don't really want to go against them because then you wouldn't have any job.
The island has lost 98% of its land over the last 50 years. So this is 1963, and this one is 2017.
And right in the middle of this delta right here is some of the worst erosion on the planet. So here we are, 40 miles as a crow flies from the river in either direction, and we are so starved for fresh water that we've lost all of our natural barriers.
Hurricanes, and then pipelines, and more hurricanes, and more pipelines, and more hurricanes, and more pipelines, and then the Morganza Gulf. The Morganza is a levee system to keep the water out, made to protect the people, but they just left us out.
What do you think is the biggest change on the island?
People moving. Every storm they had, somebody moved. Somebody else. And now what you got? 7, 8 families left out there?
It was a hard decision, because every storm that comes, you have to let people stay. The whole generation, when the island was full of people, there was all shoppers, all customers. But as they pass away, the children moved away. So I own this outdoor, sold on this store since 1991. It was 30 years, July 1st.
Do you think it's important for a community to have a store?
Absolutely. Once you lose your community store, you lose your school, you don't have a community anymore. It would be great to be able to save the island, but I think it's almost too far gone. I think Albert saw that near 20 years ago. And right now, it would be so expensive, it'd be almost impossible, I think, to keep the island as is.
The island was awarded a federal grant to relocate the tribe, and this caused even more divisiveness. And it also was the root of the buzzworthy title of the first climate refugees. And then the journalists came.
First climate refugees, and that don't sound too good. Sound good for them, but don't sound good for me, because we're not some refugees. First climate refugees. Refugees don't have a place to live, huh? That's what I gather. But island people had a place to live, so I don't believe we're refugees.
So what do you think about working with journalists and academics? Is there a reason to do it?
No, there's no reason to work with journalists.
We do have a few minutes for questions or comments. Questions, yes?
My question is, African Americans and their genealogical records?
Yes. Whether it's well documented, I don't know. I'm not, I was part of the tribal council for a couple of years, but all of that, those records they've been like working on. But just to say that there has definitely been the divide and conquer practices of discrimination and oppression have played out in this federal recognition process of like the paper trail. And, you know, I don't know any like firsthand, but, well, I guess I was just in Minnesota and met my cousin, you know, who's a Afro-Houma man who also like the whole process of like how because we're not federally recognized, we're only state recognized, the Houma and just to say the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw Confederation, we're all relatives. The BIA came back in the late 90s and recommended that the United Houma Nation split and to follow more direct bloodlines. Also, our people we're not paper people, right? So those like paper documents that they want to prove. And then this like, the way things have played out down the bayou with racism and, you know, even within own families, it's like, you know, that like, oh, they're really dark, they're not, they're, you know, and the truth is that we're all mixed here in the Delta, and that people have had to choose to define their identity by like, I'm gonna go with this. You know, my grandmother tells a story, we used to tell a story of like going to see her cousin down by Lafourche, and they were like, you don't come here. Like, my kids are going to school, I'm passing as white, I don't know you. And the reason why my grandparents migrated to St. Bernard is because they were able to find work. And that was a far way to go in the 1940s from Pointe-aux-Chenes to St. Bernard. That's like a big move, but they were allowed to work, or they had work, and their kids were allowed to go to school without question, whereas in Terrebonne and Lafourche, they had white school, black schools, and Indian schools. So, you know, that by like just moving across the river, they were able to like have access to public education in a way that they weren't. So, that legacy is deep.
So the cousin who you met, was that a DNA cousin?
Duwaba. No, I mean, he was like, hey, you know, we were introduced through a friend, and then we were doing like, okay, what is your, like, the furthest grandmother that you can trace back? And Marianne Nares is a matriarchal, they're women. I wanted to say this, and I didn't say it in my speech, just thought, or speech or talk or whatever, sharing, download. It's the women. You know, in our paper trails, it's Indigenous women that we're able to trace back to. And to think about how in these times, it's not heard here in the same way that in the North, especially in Indigenous communities that are being inundated by oil and gas work, the legacy of missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, and to think about how in the early times of colonization, that's what was happening. It was that these Indigenous women, these love raids, that women were being taken. And that is still happening in a different kind of way, but in the same kind of way of like in the oil patches of North Dakota, or what was happening up in Minnesota, that people disappear, they get disappeared. And so yeah, I was thinking of that earlier. Yes.
Hi, I'm from Canada, and I just want to thank you for your presentation.
from Louisiana, it's different now, but a decade ago, people would be like, oh, like a Mardi Gras Indian. And that's such like a layered and complicated conversation, especially when you're out in the street and you see the faces of people who are identifying as Black masking, and you know that they're indigenous. I mean, my friend Zohar Israel, we work together a lot, and it's funny, like in a performance, he plays the Black man from Treme, and I play an indigenous woman, kind of myself. We're kind of playing ourselves in a way, but he's more Choctaw than he is Black, but everybody just identifies him as being a Black man, you know, and so I think that, and also that it's like, do you have your credentials? Do you have your card? What is your bloodline? You know, these kinds of ways of like, and what that comes with what privilege, you know, like, yeah, I always say that the Houma dodged the Trail of Tears by going deep into the Delta, and who's gonna pull you out? And we've just been trying to survive since then, and yeah, it's interesting times to be in, especially when I first started doing this work in the late 90s, people weren't talking about that there were indigenous people in Louisiana at all. And now it's really, you know, as Petra was saying, like a little bit surprising that it was last year when there was the first Indigenous kind of symposium here on campus, but also it's happening. And also, I think we cannot segregate and silo the conversations, especially when we're of mixed descent, especially where we're in a place like South Louisiana that has so much to teach and so much to learn, and how we have to see the full story of the past if we're going to be able to move together. So. Yes.
So in this age or era of heritage tourism, I've noticed that the plantations give slight mentions of the indigenous people. Just very slight mentions, which are very outdated and without very much scholarship. Has the Choctaw or the Houma Nation approached them to say that you don't like the way our people are being represented?
Not to my knowledge. When I was on council, I went once to the Houma's house, and I was a little bit like, I think I was just like, what is going on here? In one, like, it is such a special place. I mean, those ancient trees, and then to learn that they were planted in this circle around this mound that's disappeared, you know, like, it just, I was like, and then we're in the big house with, you know, the plantation owners. And I think, yeah, the way that the stories along River Road get told, and also the story that's playing out right now in River Road, like, there should be a lot more. I know that there is some work to designate River Road as a cultural heritage trail. The descendants are doing a lot of work on this right now, especially against the Wallace Grain Terminal, to really stop the expansion of the chemical corridor that's happening there. But no, they kind of were inviting us to come and wear our costumes, which we had to be like, it's regalia, and I kind of was so like just blown away. And I was with a bunch of men, I was the only woman, and I was younger, so I bit my tongue more than maybe I should have at that moment, but it's real work that needs to happen. I mean, you know, all these not all of them. There's a lot of plantations that are doing really great work, of course, Bitney and others, but yeah, like, I wrestle with the cultural economy and the commodification of culture, and also, you know, this weird kind of fascination with like the dark side, being in the French Quarter and seeing all of these tours that are going around and like the stories that they're telling of torture. And it's like, why is somebody paying for this? It's not the truth, and it's like gross, you know? And there's so many people I can't walk down the street, you know? So, I'm sorry, I'll get, like, it's a real pet peeve of mine right now. Thank you all so much for being here and being part of this conversation.
Thank you for your words of wisdom and sharing.
And remember, man can shackle the hand, man can shackle the feet, but only you can shackle the mind. The mind is free to travel wherever you dare to take it. Welcome to another edition of Count Time Podcast.